Alright, YouTube, here's a little bit of good news for the United States for a change, something that generally doesn't appear in the media. The federal government has now taken its first step towards legalizing hemp to grow hemp crops. Of course, in some states it was already legal. It wasn't actually federally legal. It was sort of a gray area. Universities were toying around with it. Certain, small-time farmers would grow a little hemp crop. People turned a blind eye to it largely because, and this is something the moralists were ranting about earlier, saying, people are going to smoke the hemp. Hemp is the cannabis plant. It is cannabis. It's a different variant. It has very low THC levels. You could smoke it. You'd need to smoke a very, very large amount to get any sort of noticeable effects. It wouldn't be something the average person would do. It wouldn't make any sense to do that when marijuana now is legal or decriminalized in several states anyway. And under the right circumstances, this could be extremely good for the United States, because it could employ many hundreds of thousands or millions of people. Hemp is a crop and I've got old booklets from the early 1900s and before, and they're printed on hemp. Hemp paper is quite superior to pulp paper made from, trees, essentially processed tree pulp. Its quality is superior. It's cheaper to produce. It's cheaper to manufacture. It's actually relatively simple compared to the pulp process. You can get more paper out of an acre of land than by using, wood pulp. It requires less fertility. All in all, this could shrink the amount of land that is being deforested for paper production, essentially. The seeds can be used to create an oil, which biofuel. It's considered a superfood. I don't use such terms because, some of that's hippy-trippy nonsense, but it is edible. The seeds are edible, and they are quite healthy. They're full of unsaturated fats and various vitamins. Hemp could be used in the fiber industry, making ropes. Hemp ropes were always used in the past, and they're probably stronger than some of the ropes people are using today. This is a potential boon to industry. And it's one that's been suppressed for a long time because I have to say that New England, which is where I'm from, is partially to blame for why hemp was banned in the first place. Of course, again, hemp is a totally different variant of the cannabis plant. It's not really smoked for any recreational purpose. It doesn't have enough THC to be smoked for a recreational purpose, unless you're, blazing up a bowl that's, the size of your dinner dish. One of the reasons was the paper manufacturers of the North and the fuel manufacturers of the South got together and realized if hemp became widespread as a crop, they tied it in with regular marijuana because it is technically the same plant. If it became widespread, it would reduce or destroy the pulp paper industry. It would reduce or destroy oil manufacturers potentially, because you can get a biofuel from hemp much more easily than using corn, more easily than using rice. In fact, the only way to create biofuel that's more efficient than using hemp oil is actually algae. And of course that requires a great input of water. It requires an industrial setup that makes it less tenable than growing a regular agricultural crop. So hemp is essentially on tops for biofuel production. It can create much more per acre. It doesn't leach the soil as much. Hemp is not a particularly needy crop. It creates these long fibrous stalks that make excellent paper and these seeds that are filled with this oil. And it doesn't really require that much in the way of nutrients, certainly far less than some crop like corn, far less than most modern rice crops that have been engineered. It's much easier to grow. It's much less needy. It can survive a drought more easily, certainly, than rice can. So that's one of the reasons it was banned. The other being, I've pointed this out, the temperance movement of the late 1800s into the early 1900s, the same people that decided alcohol should be outlawed, the same people that started passing all sorts of moral laws against sodomy and so forth, these were the same people that went after hemp. These are the same people that went after drugs as a scourge. And the feminists were actually involved with this because back then feminism was essentially we want our husbands clean shaven and not chewing tobacco and smoking opium. Well, hemp was one of those things that was tied in there. But a hemp industry in the United States could outcompete basically every other country on earth and bring paper production back here without having to cut the forest down, which is a great thing. It would prevent a lot of deforestation. A lot of the trees that go into that in other countries are from rainforests and things like that. That's not great. We can outcompete them there. We can use it as a fuel substitute more easily. That would also bring the corn industry back to producing food rather than producing ethanol or whatever the hell they're producing on a regular basis as an additive to fuel to stretch the gasoline further. This could be very big for the United States. And again, you have these moralists whining about, oh, well, people are going to smoke the hemp. No, they're not. If they smoke the hemp, they're going to be disgusted probably by its flavor. It's also called ditchweed. It's called ditchweed for a reason because in areas where pot was once cultivated, you have these scraggly plants lying in a ditch nearby. They have virtually no THC. You could cut them down and use them for fiber if you wanted. This is a great thing. And also, as someone who collects old booklets and manuscripts, I can tell you, the ones printed on pulp are falling apart compared to the ones that were printed on hemp. The paper is much more durable. It's of a much higher quality. If it's cheaper to produce and it's higher quality, it's a no-brainer that you should use hemp for this purpose. This doesn't even have anything to do with the marijuana argument because it's not being used as a drug. Hemp is an agricultural crop, a food, a fuel source, a paper source, and a way to prevent land from eroding and being leached by constantly pouring ammoniate fertilizers on it and things like that. It can prevent deforestation. This is a good thing. This is one of the few things from the Farm Bill that is extremely good. I agree with it fully. Again, it's disconnected totally from the marijuana argument. The only reason they're even tied together in the popular consciousness is because the same people went after these two distinct variations of cannabis for the same reason. Hemp can outcompete pulp paper. It can bring jobs back to the United States. Pulp paper right now is scattered around the world. Everyone's looking for cheap pulp paper. This would mean we could produce it much more cheaply than any other country, no matter how low their wages were, could produce far inferior pulp paper when you figure in the shipping cost. We can produce it right here. We can prevent deforestation in our own forests up here in New England. That is a continual concern because people are always talking about taking our trees and taking our water because they have droughts. Well, you're not going to get it. So you're going to need to learn to deal with hemp for right now. Again, far superior paper quality. Just look at some of these old booklets. Anything basically pre-Prohibition era, late 1800s, early 1900s, there's a lot of stuff printed on hemp. There's no THC in this paper. It's a regular processed paper. It looks better than pulp paper. It's much harder to tear. The colors show up better on it. It's good quality. That's what it's an industrial product. Anyone that's worried that this is some sort of backdoor to pot legalization doesn't understand. Basically, what this is about is acknowledging the fact that this doesn't have anything to do with marijuana production. It's a completely separate issue. Same plant, two variants. It's essentially like, look at the opium poppy. Yeah, you can create heroin from the opium tears bled from a poppy. You can also create medicines. Two totally different uses for the same plant. Nobody's arguing that we should ban all opium production, even on a pharmaceutical level, because somebody might use it for heroin production. We don't want that devil's weed in our backyards. By the way, you can still legally grow opium poppies as long as you don't have a whole field full of them. It should be the same with hemp. People could literally grow hemp in their backyard and make their own paper out of it. You do the same with papyrus. I actually know how to make paper from papyrus. Of course, it's probably easier to do with hemp. Requires less of a warm climate, less sun, even less fertility than papyrus does. It probably yields a higher quality product than anything you can manufacture at home with papyrus. But this could bring a lot of jobs back to the United States. Has nothing to do with drugs. Moralists aside, they're complaining about a complete shadow, a ghost that doesn't actually exist. This is good for the United States, so finally I get to put up some good news here. Um, and there's a lot of bad news right now, but that stands out as one of the good things, so I'll report on that first. I intend to make another video in a few minutes. That's about all. Peace out.